Hi everyone, we are moving on to our next type of inheritance today, which is sex-linked traits. So if you remember from when we were together in class, the first 22 pairs of chromosomes are called the autosomes, and the 23rd pair are the sex chromosomes, right? And if you are female, then what are your sex chromosomes? XX, right? And if you are male, then your sex chromosomes are XY. All right, so we know that on those chromosomes there are certain genes that are carried there. So sex-linked traits are, or this type of inheritance deals in how those traits and how those genes are passed on. So sex-linked traits are traits whose alleles are located on the sex chromosomes, and you can have traits that are X-linked or they are carried on the X chromosome. And you can also have traits that are Y-linked or they are carried on the Y chromosome. Now, there's far fewer traits on the Y chromosome than there is the X chromosome. And if you remember, the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. The X chromosome has, they say, up to close to 1,000 genes on it, whereas the Y chromosome has in the hundreds, less than that. So not many genes there, not many traits. And most of the traits that are on the Y chromosome deal in male sex characteristics. Whereas the X chromosome, because it's so much larger, you have genes on there that are not related to only female sex characteristics or sex characteristics at all. And an example of that is red-green color blindness. So you may know somebody who has this or is colorblind. This is a specific type. This is an X-linked trait, meaning that the gene for red-green color blindness is carried on the X chromosome. So if you have red-green color blindness, you would probably not be able to pass a red-green color blindness test like this one here. So if you have normal vision, you should be able to see a number 12 inside of this circle. And if you have normal vision, you should be able to see a 74 inside of this circle. People who have red-green color blindness would not be able to identify those numbers inside of the circles. Now, if you can't see them, don't panic. I am not an eye doctor, and this is not a formal test, all right? But this is to give you an idea of what you would look at if you were being treated or suspected of having red-green color blindness. So because this is an X-linked trait, the way that you show X-linked or sex-linked traits, you have to show the alleles by denoting which chromosome that gene is carried on. So since this is red-green color blindness, we write out the X because it's carried on the X. And if you have normal vision, you have the dominant version of that allele. So you would write a superscript, kind of like we did with codominance, except now we're using the sex chromosomes. A superscript, capital C, for normal vision, and a superscript lowercase c to show red-green color blindness. So the possible genotypes for these people who have this disorder or do not have it, normal females can have two different genotypes. They can be homozygous and have X capital C, or females are in the unique position with X-linked traits where they can be carriers, meaning they can have a copy of the recessive allele but not actually show the trait themselves. So this woman would still have normal vision. The only way that females can get an X-linked recessive disorder like red-green color blindness is if they get both copies of the recessive allele on their X chromosome. So they would have to inherit it twice, like in this chart here. This is another homozygous female, but in this case she's homozygous recessive, and she would have red-green color blindness. For males, because they are XY, a normal male only gets one copy of the X chromosome, and to have normal color vision, they would have a capital C on their X chromosome or the dominant allele. If they inherit a copy of the recessive allele on their X chromosome, then they would have red-green color blindness. So more often than not, any type of X-linked disorder, like this one, for example, red-green color blindness, it is said that, or it is a fact rather, that more males get these traits or these disorders than females. Why do you think that is? Think about it. Why would a male be more likely to get a disorder like this than a female? So if you said, or you're thinking about how males have to inherit only one copy of the X chromosome, whereas females have to get both, you're right. In males, because there is no second X chromosome, there's nothing to mask a recessive gene, whereas in females, you can have that scenario where they can be carriers for something. Females have to inherit two copies of that recessive allele to get the disorder or have the disorder, whereas males only have to inherit one defective or one recessive allele on their X chromosome. So they just by statistics, have a greater chance of having these X-linked recessive disorders. And you can see in this diagram here, you have a father who is not affected by an X-linked recessive disorder. The mother is a carrier, so in essence, you have two parents who are normal. And then if you look at their children, they have a 25% chance of having a son who has the disorder. They have a 25% chance of having a daughter who's a carrier, another chance of having an unaffected daughter, so all their daughters would be not expressing this disorder, and then they have a 25% chance of having an unaffected son. So although neither parent has it, they have the chance of passing it on to some of their children or having their children be carriers of that disorder. And she wouldn't know that she was a carrier. She would still express the normal phenotype in this case. So let's look at an example with hemophilia. Hemophilia is another type of sex-linked trait. Do you know what hemophilia is? Hemophilia is a blood clotting disorder. So when you get injured, say you get a paper cut, right? You kind of hold a tissue on there, you just kind of let it sit for a couple seconds, and within a minute or so, if you do not have hemophilia, all of your clotting factors, which are proteins, will rush to that area and stop the blood flow and clot it up so that you can start to heal. People who have hemophilia do not have those clotting factors. They do not have the little proteins that rush to the injured area and start clogging up the injury. So if you have hemophilia, something as simple as a bruise, like in this picture here, or if you have a large scrape or something like that, can be life-threatening. People are able to go and get treated. They're able to have those clotting factors injected into them at like a hospital or a doctor's office, but their body doesn't produce them normally. So hemophilia, again, is an X-linked trait. It is carried on the X chromosome. So here's another example where this has nothing to do with male or female sex characteristics, but it is a trait that's carried on the X chromosome. The dominant version of the allele, or capital H, results in normal blood clot formation, and the recessive allele, or lowercase h, will result in abnormal blood clot formation, which would be hemophilia. So down here, we're going to set up some of the genotypes for the different sexes and whether they are normal or have hemophilia or not. So this first symbol here is for a female, if you've ever seen this before. So a biological female, she has two possible genotypes. She can be homozygous with 2 copies of the dominant allele, or she can be a carrier, right, where she is carrying that recessive allele, but she would still express the normal blood clots. She would not be considered to have hemophilia. If a woman has hemophilia, she has to inherit 2 recessive alleles, so this would be her genotype. For a normal male, he would have the dominant allele on his X chromosome, nothing on his Y chromosome. A lot of times I see students wanting to write something here on the Y chromosome. You just leave it blank because this is an X-linked disorder. So you're leaving the Y blank. If it was a Y-linked disorder, then you would write nothing on the X and you would write something next to the Y, but that's not the case here. And then if you had a male who had hemophilia, he would have the recessive version of the allele on his X chromosome. So let's do a sample problem together. What are the chances that the son of a woman who is heterozygous, aka a carrier, for hemophilia being born with hemophilia? Prove your answer using a Punnett square. So what are the chances that the son of a woman who is heterozygous, aka a carrier? So we're not given any information about the father in this case. However, we're told that the mother is a carrier, so we would identify her genotype first. She'd be X capital H, X lowercase h. And for the sake of solving this problem, I'm just going to put a question mark next to Dad's X chromosome because we don't know what he is at this point. But we can still go through and solve this problem. So we'll put Mom on one side of the Punnett square, Dad on the other. It's perfectly acceptable to put a question mark if you're not given any information about the person or you're not sure. And I fill in my Punnett square for the males because I'm being asked about the chances for a son. So I don't even have to address this part of the Punnett square because I'm not being asked a question about the females. I can leave it blank, right? Work smarter, not harder. So I fill in my Punnett square. One of my sons, here's my other son. So I'm being asked, what are the chances of a son having hemophilia? And in this case, here he is, right? We have a 50% chance of having a son who has hemophilia. Now, if you're wondering why it's not 25%, that's a good question. Because this particular problem is only asking us about the sons. So you're completely ignoring the females in this Punnett square and just addressing the sons. So 1 out of 2 chances, right, of having a son who has hemophilia, or a 50% chance. So when you're solving these sex-linked problems, you have to be really careful of the wording of the problem and what you're being asked, because if you answered this question with 25%, you would be wrong. It would be marked as wrong for solving this problem. So just pay close attention to these problems as you go through and the wording of them and what you're being asked. All right, so I am going to post a sample problem, or a problem set for you guys to work on. I'm going to post a sample video of me doing one of the problems so that you can help get yourself started. But of course, you can reach out. Let me know if you're having any trouble with this stuff. All right.